The year was 1887, and the sun burned across the New Mexico desert like a fire that refused to die. The land stretched wide and empty, covered in golden sand and dry brush. A single stagecoach rolled along the trail, carrying a few travelers who were not used to such harsh country. Among them sat Lady Eleanor Whitmore, a young woman from England dressed in clothes far too fine for the Wild West. Eleanor had left her home in London not long before. She had come to America seeking distance from gossip, whispers, and memories that made her heart ache. The West, she believed, would give her silence and freedom. But she had not understood what kind of land it really was. As the coach rattled across the uneven road, she looked out the window at the empty sky. The heat made the air shimmer. The driver shouted something to the horses, and the wheels hit a sharp stone, shaking the coach hard. Eleanor gripped her seat. She was nervous, but she kept her chin high, refusing to show fear. Suddenly, the driver cried out. The horses neighed and stopped. The passengers shouted, confused. There was chaos outside. Eleanor tried to open the door, but before she could, something heavy struck the side of the coach. The horses bolted and the coach turned sharply. Eleanor fell and hit her shoulder hard against the wooden frame. When the noise finally stopped, she felt dizzy. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and there was pain. Sharp, deep pain. She tried to stand, but her arm would not move. The desert blurred before her eyes. She felt her breath grow shorter and everything went dark. When she woke again, the world was quiet. She was lying on a rough bed inside a small wooden cabin. Sunlight came through the cracks in the wall. Her head throbbed and her shoulder felt heavy and strange. She tried to move but winced in pain. Then she saw him, a man sitting by the doorway, hat in hand. His clothes were dusty, his boots worn, and his face tanned from long days in the sun. He looked at her calmly as if he had been waiting. "You're awake," he said, his voice steady and low. Eleanor tried to sit up. "Where am I?" "What happened?" "Found you by the road," he said. "Stagecoach was empty. You were out cold." She looked down at herself. Her dress sleeve was gone, cut clean away, and her shoulder was wrapped in cloth. Her heart raced. You touched me?" she asked in shock. The man's eyes didn't change. "You were bleeding. Had to stop it. You'd have passed out for good if I hadn't." Eleanor felt a wave of anger and embarrassment. No man had ever seen her like this, not without her permission. Her upbringing told her to protect her dignity above all else. Her face burned red. "How dare you," she whispered. "You had no right." The man, whose name was Colt Dawson, stood up slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "you can believe what you like. I just did what was needed." He walked to the small table, poured water from a canteen into a tin cup, and placed it beside her bed. "I don't need your help," she snapped. Colt nodded once, his expression unreadable. "All right, then. Suit yourself." He stepped outside, leaving her with the quiet wind. Eleanor sat there, breathing hard. She wanted to leave, to run from the shame she felt. But when she tried to stand, pain shot through her shoulder. The room spun. She sank back, trembling. The sound of the wind against the wooden walls seemed louder than ever. After a long while, the door creaked open again. Colt returned, carrying a bowl of soup and some bread. "Eat something," he said simply. "I said I don't need your help," she replied, but her voice was weaker now. "Fine," he said, setting it on the table. "But fever's coming. You don't eat, you'll be worse by nightfall." He didn't argue, didn't try to convince her. He just placed the food down and went back to sit near the fire. Eleanor watched him for a while. He was quiet, almost too quiet. He moved with the calm of someone used to long days of silence. His hat hung on a peg by the door, and his rifle leaned beside it, old but well kept. The smell of soup filled the small cabin. Her stomach growled, though she wished it wouldn't. After a while, she reached for the bowl. Colt said nothing, but she caught him glance her way once just to see that she was managing. The soup was plain, beans and herbs, but to her surprise, it tasted good. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and looked toward him. "What is this place?" she asked at last. "Old miner's cabin," Colt said. "Abandoned a few years back. I use it when I'm out this way." "And what do you do out here, Mr. Dawson?" "Ride fence, mend cattle trails. Sometimes guide folks lost on their way." Eleanor studied him. His manners were rough, his words few. But there was something steady about him, like a tree that had grown through too many storms to be easily moved. Still, her pride would not let her show any softness. "You should have taken me back to town," she said. "I can pay you." He looked at her with a faint smile that wasn't quite a smile. "Town's 2 days out. You weren't fit to ride. I ain't after your money, ma'am. Just figured you'd want to live long enough to get there." The words stung more than she expected. She turned her face away. That evening, as the sun went down, she sat watching the orange light spread through the cracks in the walls. Her shoulder burned with pain and her body ached all over. Colt moved quietly around the cabin, adding wood to the fire and checking her bandage again. She flinched when he came near, but his touch was careful, gentle even. "Still clean," he said softly. "You'll heal fine," she didn't reply. Her throat felt tight. When he stepped outside to check the horses, she lay staring at the ceiling. The air smelled of dust and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. She thought of home, of the green fields of England, of warm rooms and quiet evenings. It felt like another lifetime. For the first time since leaving, she began to feel afraid. The West was not a place of romance or adventure, as the stories said. It was wild, endless, and lonely. And here she was, alone with a stranger she had insulted. Hours later, the fever began. Her head grew heavy and her thoughts drifted. She dreamed of the stagecoach, of heat and spinning wheels. She thought she heard voices, but when she opened her eyes, only Colt was there, sitting by the fire watching over her. When the fever passed and she woke again, the morning light was softer. The world outside the cabin was still. She turned her head and saw Colt asleep in a chair by the door, his hat over his face, his boots dusty. She realized he must have stayed awake most of the night. Her heart softened then, just a little. She remembered her anger, her pride, and the sharp words she had thrown at him. Now, seeing him like this, a man who had nothing, who had asked for nothing, she began to feel something new. Regret. She didn't speak it aloud, not yet. But deep down, she knew that everything she thought she understood about class, manners, and worth was beginning to change. Outside, the sun rose over the desert, painting the sand gold. The land looked peaceful again, as if the night's hardships had been washed away. Inside the cabin, the noblewoman who once feared a cowboy's touch lay quiet, healing not only from her wound, but from her pride. And though she didn't know it yet, this strange meeting in a lonely corner of the Wild West would change her heart forever. The morning light spilled gently through the cracks in the cabin walls. Lady Eleanor lay still for a moment, listening to the sound of the wind brushing past the dry grass outside. Her shoulder no longer throbbed as much, and the fever that had gripped her for days seemed to have lifted. Across the room, Colt Dawson sat at the small table, carving a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. He didn't notice her watching him. His hands were rough, but his movements were patient and steady. There was something calming about him, something that reminded her of the earth itself. Strong, quiet, dependable. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with thoughts neither dared to voice. Finally, Eleanor cleared her throat. "Mr. Dawson," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Ma'am? I wanted to thank you," she began slowly. The words didn't come easily. "For saving me. And for taking care of me when I was not at my best." Colt gave a small nod. "Didn't do much. Just kept you breathing." "That's quite a lot," she said with a faint smile. He didn't answer right away. "Guess we're even then," he finally said. "Even?" she asked, puzzled. He looked toward the window. "You gave me a reason to stop wandering. Been a while since I had someone to look after. Reminds a man he's still got a heart." His voice was quiet, but the honesty in it made Eleanor's chest tighten. She wanted to say something kind, but before she could, he stood up and walked outside, taking his hat with him. She watched him go and felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude, confusion, and something softer she didn't yet understand. That afternoon, she gathered enough strength to step outside. The desert air was warm, filled with the smell of sage and dust. The sky stretched endlessly above her, painted with soft blue and streaks of white clouds. She had never seen a horizon so wide, so full of light. Colt was near the corral, checking the horses. He looked up when he saw her and tipped his hat. "You shouldn't be walking too much," he said. "I needed the air," she replied, "and I needed to see something other than these four walls." He gave a small smile. "Fair enough. She leaned against the fence watching as he brushed one of the horses, a chestnut mare with kind eyes. "She's beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Her name's June," Colt said. "Had her since she was a colt, pardon the wordplay." Eleanor laughed lightly, surprising herself. It was the first time she had laughed in days. "I didn't know cowboys could make jokes," he shrugged. "Only when I'm sure they'll be understood." They both smiled. For a moment the space between them felt easy, as if the world outside didn't matter. That evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, Colt started a small fire outside the cabin. He roasted some beans and shared them with her. The two sat in silence, watching the stars appear one by one. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked after a while. "Miss what?" "Home," she said. "Where you came from?" Colt poked at the fire with a stick. "Home burned down a long time ago," he said quietly. "I grew up out here. Lost my family in a fire when I was a boy. Since then I just keep moving, from one ranch to another." Eleanor's heart ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. Life's got its way of teaching folks what matters. Some of us just learn it the hard way." She looked at him, at his calm face, his steady hands, and realized how different his life had been from hers. She had spent her years in grand halls and gardens, surrounded by wealth and expectation. Yet in all that comfort, she had never met someone with his quiet strength. "I think," she said softly, "you've learned more than most people ever do." He looked at her, his eyes kind but unreadable. "Maybe, but folks like you don't belong out here. Once you're strong enough, you should go back east. You've got a life waiting." Eleanor didn't answer. A part of her wanted to say that she wasn't sure where her life belonged anymore. Days turned into a week. Her wound healed slowly, and soon she could move her arm without pain. During the days, she helped around the cabin, sweeping the floor, boiling water, and sometimes reading aloud from the small leather-bound book she carried in her travel bag. Colt would listen quietly as she read stories from faraway lands. Sometimes she caught him smiling at the way she pronounced certain words. "You make everything sound fancy," he'd say, "and you make everything sound plain," she'd reply playfully. "Guess that makes us even again." Their small jokes became a habit, a gentle rhythm that filled the quiet hours. One afternoon, while Eleanor was resting outside, she overheard two travelers who had stopped by for water. They spoke about Colt, about how he had once saved a little boy from a burning barn. The boy had lived, but Colt's brother had not made it out. That was how Colt had gotten the long scar on his hand. Eleanor listened silently, her heart heavy. She realized now why he had spoken so calmly about loss. He had lived through it. She understood why he never spoke about himself unless asked. He carried his pain quietly, like a secret that had become part of his strength. That evening, when the travelers had gone, Eleanor watched him repair the fence near the corral. The setting sun threw long shadows across the sand. "You never told me about your brother," she said softly. Colt stopped for a moment, then continued hammering. "Not much to tell," he said. "He was younger, braver than me. The barn came down before I could get him out." "I heard you saved another child that day," she said. He nodded once. "Didn't save the one that mattered most, though." Eleanor walked closer. "I think your brother would have been proud. You did what you could, man, and more than most would have done." He didn't reply, but his eyes softened for the first time. That night she couldn't sleep. She thought about how much she had changed since the day she first saw him. She remembered how angry she had been, how proud, how blind to kindness that didn't come dressed in fine clothes. Now she saw that real nobility wasn't about titles or manners. It was about heart. And Colt Dawson, the quiet cowboy who had saved her life, had more of it than anyone she had ever met. The next morning, she told him she was ready to travel back to town. Colt saddled the horses and helped her pack what little she had. Neither of them spoke much. The air was filled with a quiet sadness neither wanted to name. When everything was ready, she stood by the horse, holding the reins but not yet mounting. "Mr. Dawson," she said softly, "I'll never forget your kindness. You've shown me more about courage and goodness than all my years of lessons ever did." Colt gave a small nod, his hat low over his eyes. "Just did what anyone decent would have done." She smiled faintly. "You and I both know that's not true." He didn't argue. He just looked at her, A long, thoughtful look that said more than words could. Then, without another word, she mounted the horse. Colt handed her a small bundle, a wooden carving of a horse, the one he had been shaping that morning she first thanked him. "Something to remember the West by," he said. She took it carefully. "I will," she whispered. "More than you know." And with that, she rode away toward the distant town, her heart heavy yet full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Days later, when Colt returned to the cabin, he found a small silver locket left on the table. Inside was a crest and her family's mark, and a folded note that read, "I was once wounded by a bullet, but it was my pride that hurt me more. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be truly noble." Colt held the locket in his calloused hand, the firelight glinting off the silver. He smiled quietly, tucking it into his pocket. From that day on, travelers who passed through those parts said they sometimes saw a cowboy riding under the sunset, a silver locket shining against his chest. No one knew who it belonged to, but those who asked were told only this: it was given by a lady from the East, the one who learned that kindness is the truest kind of grace. And in that wild land where pride and dust once ruled her heart, Eleanor Whitmore's story lived on, not as a tale of anger or loss, but of understanding, forgiveness, and quiet love that crossed two very different worlds.